September 11, 2001. At 6:30 a.m., Lieutenant Colonel Brian D. Birdwell arrived at his Pentagon office just outside Washington, D.C. At that moment, the decorated Army officer was not thinking about mortality. That would change in 3 hours. Hello, I'm Dick Jensen, your host for a conversation with an eyewitness to terrorism. It's a very big honor for me to be standing alongside of Lieutenant Colonel Brian Birdwell, U.S. Army. He is a survivor of the 9/11 attack on the Pentagon, and we're going to be chatting about that in the next few moments. Colonel, good to have you.
My pleasure, sir.
Let's have a seat.
Okay, sir, sure.
The 757 jetliner that slammed into the Pentagon on 9/11 impacted an area where Colonel Birdwell worked as an executive officer. Just before the terrorist-directed crash, the Texas native was in his office with two colleagues. At 9:30, they were watching New York's Twin Towers disaster unfold on television when Birdwell excused himself to visit a nearby men's restroom. The colonel was returning to his office when the force of the exploding jet knocked him to the hallway floor less than 20 yards from the point of impact. The people in his office were killed instantly. Though critically injured, Birdwell miraculously survived to tell his story.
There were three pains, or three types of pain, some physical, some emotional, that I experienced in the next 2 minutes. First was the physical pain of the burns. I was burned on 60 to 65% of my body, with 40% being third-degree burns. That's why I wear the pressure garments on my arms and hands and on my forehead. Those are the areas that were completely regrafted, where I lost skin, down to having no skin whatsoever. Third-degree burns means the skin has been consumed. You're now down to muscle and such like that. The second pain was the emotional pain of undergoing or withstanding a grievous bodily injury at the same time that I made the realization that I could not escape from that injury. Let me give you the detail of that. At the time I'm walking down the corridor before the blast, well-lit hallway, I know exactly where I'm going. At the time of the impact, you've got the blast, the fire alarm going on, but the fire is also, the blast damages the electrical lighting. The corridor is filling up with smoke. Where I'm located, I've got fires around me because, I mean, not only was I hit with fire, but the building is in fact caught on fire in those areas. Two, it's not, I mean, the smoke is not trickling. The smoke is billowing into the hallway. And so as I'm, one, struggling to get to my feet, which my sense of balance is completely out of whack because of the concussion. Two, I'm breathing in fuel vapor, black smoke. I'm asphyxiating my body to death is what I'm doing. I'm not breathing oxygen. I am breathing petroleum fire is what I'm breathing. The heat of the air, or the smoke and such of that, is about 160, 180 degrees. So I'm burning my lungs as well. I had a very serious inhalation injury as well. In those, and I guess minute to 2 minutes, I make the realization very quickly that I'm dying. And that's the third pain that I was dealing with, was the realization that I had come to the finality of my life. And so very shortly after making that realization, I thought about Mel and I thought about Matt and how I had said goodbye to them that morning. And then I cried out in a very loud voice, Jesus, I'm coming to see you. It wasn't a soft, okay, Lord, I'm coming to see you. I mean, it was a very impassioned, I know where I'm going to spend eternity at, and Lord, save me from this. Because death, what was in fact going to save me from this painful death I was dying. I had come to my endurance, I mean, physically in good condition prior to that, and in 2 minutes, I mean, I was exhausted. Not only because of the injury, but because of the inhalation injury. I collapsed to the floor and waited for whatever that feeling is that occurs when the body, the soul departs the body. And I laid there for, again, I don't have a good sense of time and space, but I laid there for probably a minute or two, I would guess. And I was like, okay, Lord, come on, let's get on with this kind of thing.
So you were mentally alert.
Oh, yeah, I'm still awake. I'm conscious through all this. That's how I can tell you the story, which is yet one of the other miracles of what happened that day, is to, pain thresholds or whatever did not come into play so that I could tell this story for the Lord as well. But I could feel liquid running down the left-hand side of my face, but it wasn't warm. It wasn't blood, which is warm. It was cold, and it took me a while. I mean, because I can't feel it anywhere other than the left-hand side of my face. But in fact, I'd collapsed under one of the functioning sprinkler systems. Many of the sprinkler systems had been damaged because of the penetration of the plane. Right. Even if the sprinkler had functioned, there were some of them that did not have water pressure to them because pipes had burst. Yes. Then there's others that weren't going to spray. It was just water was billowing out of or pouring out of the broken pipes, yes, which didn't give you any pressure in other parts of the building. But where I was, they worked. And so what had happened is I quickly came to the realization that no, the Lord was in fact not going to call me home. The sprinkler system had engaged and put out the fire that was consuming me, the fires that were around me. So in a very short period of time, not only did I was not suffering from the pain of the burns. I mean, I shouldn't say that. I was no longer being consumed by burns. I mean, I was still in the pain from the burns themselves, the results of them, but I was no longer on fire because the fire around me, sheetrock, ceiling tiles, etc., was doused because of the sprinkler system engaging. I now only had to contend with the smoke, and because I'm laying on the floor and the corridors in the Pentagon are anywhere from 75 to 100 yards long, as the smoke's working its way down the corridor, it's rising, and so I can see an ambient glow of light in the distance down toward the A-ring, which is, again, the innermost ring of the building. So the Lord took care of the pain of the fires. I had navigational ability because I now, in opening my eyes, I was not surrounded by fire, but I was at ground level, able to see where I should go. I crawled for just a little bit to make sure that I was going in the right direction. But at the time I was struggling, I had no idea of which way was to safety, which way was to danger. Laying in the floor wet, I was able to determine which way was to safety, which way was to danger. And so I eventually struggled to my feet, got up, and staggered down the hallway. I mean, this was not a calm walk or a quick run. This was a stumble down the hallway. And around between where I got to the C and the B ring, which is about 30, 40 yards from where I got up, Colonel Roy Wallace and Colonel Bill McKinnon came out of the B ring, and had they not done so, I mean, that was great that they did. The Lord put them at the right place at the right time. They were getting ready to search for survivors in their office by trying to get through to the other side of their office through corridor 4. Of course, they realized.
Birtwell was hospitalized for 3 months. The colonel was in an intensive care unit on September 13 when he received a visit from his commander-in-chief.
Mrs. Bush was visiting first. She was coming into the room, and being from Texas and such, she came in and she said, how are you doing? Where are you from? Fort Worth, Texas. Oh, we're from Midland. We did the little Texas happy dance, for people that meet each other from Texas. Mel's doing all the interceding here. I mean, Mel says I communicated back and forth by her reading my lips, but I have no recollection of doing any of that. But we talked about, family and pets and children and where we're from and things like that. And then she says, well, I brought someone to see you. And there's, silence. The curtains that separate your intensive care room are still closed. And so she turns over her left shoulder and says, I said I brought someone to see you. And being the good husband, having missed his first cue, the president comes in on second cue, and he comes to the foot of the bed, says, Colonel Birdwell. And he renders a salute, and I'm returning the salute, and at the time, and I want you to have a very clear picture of what's happening in here.
Please.
There's my wife, Mrs. Bush, Colonel Rhoda, and my nurse, along with Dr. Jordan. And that's all that's in there in the room that I'm aware of. at the time, I'm prepared for surgery. And what that means is that the bandages that are normally on me have been removed to save surgery room time. The doctors don't want to spend a lot of time removing that stuff. So the nurses prepare you in that way, and they place a sterile towel or a sterile, it's almost like a giant disposable diaper that is laid underneath you and then folded over your arms. Both arms have that.
Mm-hmm.
So as I raise my arm to salute the president, return the president's salute, my arm comes out from underneath that towel, and what the president's looking at is muscle, tendon, an arm with no skin, and charred marks up here at where the burns stop and such. He holds his salute while I'm returning it. Again, I don't have a recollection of being able to, drop my salute or what. I don't remember that. But he holds his salute while I'm returning it. And what's unusual about that, and the reason I tell you that is because the senior man always returns the salute of the junior man. And in this case, he's holding his salute for the junior man. Normally it would be my place to hold it and wait for him to return
I understand.
it. And that's indicative of a commander-in-chief who understands the sacrifices that may be made, and more importantly, his responsibility in those sacrifices, because
Yes.
he's getting ready shortly thereafter this visit in the next days and weeks to
Yes.
give orders to send my fellow compatriots into Afghanistan and other
Yeah.
places to take care of business. So after the salute and such, he drops it and comes to the side of the bed and says, "You're a great American." We do the little Texas happy dance, where are you from and such like that. And I said, "You're a great American, and this is not going to go unanswered. We're going to get the men and the organization that caused this to happen." And asked if he could pray for us and our family. And of course we said yes. And it was a great visit.
Colonel Birdwell described a painful period of recovery and rehabilitation.
During my 12 weeks in the hospital, I would go through physical therapy to ensure that I kept a range of motion, because a burn scar, or any scar for that matter, the scar tissue is actually a contraction of the skin tissue during its healing process. But when your entire arm is scar and it's contracting, you can lose range of motion, because I don't have enough skin to cover the complete range of motion that all my joints. I mean, I can't make a fist right now. I can't bend my wrists downward, things of that nature. I can't fully extend my right arm right now. And so what I expect in the near future is, although I'm getting better physically from my push-ups, sit-ups, running, those things that had to do with my physical fitness by being a service member, those are getting better, although slower than what I would like. They're getting better. I still have some challenges. I can't tie my own tie. I can't button my top collar. There's some challenges doing some things that require intricate handwork. But ultimately, I expect probably 1 to 3 more surgeries, both one to correct my elbow, and then 2 to correct my wrists.
You told me before the interview that no shrapnel invaded your body.
Right, I had no puncture wounds from any of the building damage that was spraying around me.
Brian Birdwell is grateful for the support received from his wife Mel and their son Matt. The Colonel also pays tribute to all the healthcare professionals who cared for him, and to his church family who ministered to him. But above all, this Pentagon survivor is grateful to God. Colonel Birdwell, we've talked about the day of the attack. We've talked about the days and weeks of recovery. Now let's talk about the days of destiny. Why are you a survivor rather than a statistic?
Oh, I think that's up to the Lord to answer that question. I mean, he's the one that answered it. I can, well, without question, you can't be this close to the point of impact as I was. Have the hazards that I've gone through, the amount of injuries, both external and internal, and live through it, and then not repay God's graciousness by not telling a story. I would be derelict as a soldier of Christ if I didn't tell the story. Given that, what I think the Lord's going to open up the right door at the right time, at the right place, for us to keep telling the story. And I think what I would like to do when the Army says, okay, you can leave now.
2 years?
No, I expect to actually be 5.
Okay.
I expect to serve 23 years.
Okay.
In fact, I'm currently right now working on my next assignment and trying to work out those details. But what I would like to do is minister to burn patients.
Great.
There are burns that are, painful, and then there's burns like industrial accidents or things of that nature where you have significant amounts of the body burned. Having experienced that, both myself and Mel from the family side of the house, Matthew has experienced it. I've experienced it from the impact of the perspective of the patient. I think Mel and I would be uniquely capable of ministering to burn patients in that regard. So.
A moment ago, you used the phrase "soldier of Christ." Of course, we appreciate your service to your country in that uniform. But tell us when you became a soldier of Christ and what that means to you.
Oh, it was 1971. I was 10 years old. I'd grown up in a Christian home, and gave my life to the Lord at age 10. And for the last 30 years, the Lord has been in charge. Whether it was my selection of having chosen well in marriage. My boss always said, Brian chose well, when he chose Mel. My career profession, things of that nature. So prior to September 11th, I was not outgoing in my faith in the sense that, just bringing up my faith and let me share Christ with you. But now with the events of what happened on that day, people tend to bring it up with me, and it gives me an opportunity to share my faith in God.
You mentioned earlier that some of the pastors came to keep you in the Word, I think is the way you said it. What biblical messages or verses of Scripture came to you while you were recovering in that hospital?
Well, there were several. Some of them more famous as I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. But then Jude 23 talks about snatching them out of the fire, where Jude is speaking to other apostles that are going to go out and spread the word about those that are not believers. You will snatch some from the fire of hell. Well, in the case of September 11th, God was snatching me out of the physical fire, not the fire of eternal damnation. But the verse that most appealed to Mel and I was 1 Peter 5:10, which says, "After you have suffered a little while, the God of all grace, who has called you to eternal salvation through His Son Christ, will Himself perfect, confirm, strengthen, and establish you." Well, Lord willing, the suffering's over with, and we're in the perfecting, confirming, strengthening, and establishing. I don't know that I'll ever be exactly the way I was. I mean, I know I physically won't be exactly the way I was September 10th, but that's sure the goal, and that's what we're getting to.
And what a wonderful destiny that will be. Yeah. Well, let's talk a moment about the nation's future. We talked about your future. Okay. The USA Today recently ran a headline front page story. Americans have great faith in each other, but their trust in CEOs, big business, priests, and HMOs is slipping away. That was a surprise to me because I felt that after September 11, there was this resurgence of patriotism and faith in God and all of that. How do you read what's happening in America today?
Well, I think just as you have to reach your lowest moments to be able to appreciate your highest valleys or your highest mountains, I think that September 11th has brought us back to rediscovering our godly heritage. I think where it talks about the organizations that we don't have faith in, those organizations are all secular. If you look at the organizations that have great amounts of faith placed in them, some are secular, like teachers, I think, is the top one listed in the articles. Military officers are second. Now, I don't think it's because I happen to be a military officer, but I think it's because of the culture of our military. Truth, integrity, fidelity, things of that nature that are character related. You cannot separate character from your profession and God. You can't do it. Just as we have chaplains in the service that represent a wide variety of faiths. We've had them since the Revolutionary War in 1775 when the Army was first established. Also on that list you'll see other pastors, Protestant, preachers are high on that list as well. They're faith-based organizations that are represented in those lists. But I think America's rediscovering its godly heritage, is really discovering what's important. And it's the foundation of this nation. The founders of our nation were very Bible, Christ-centered men. And they had various, Baptists or Lutheran or Methodist or otherwise, various sects. But they were a very godly group of men that understood that for this nation to prosper, we must always fear God. It's not that we want God on our side, it's we want to make sure we're on God's side. That's the key.
Yes.
And I think we're rediscovering that.
Now, that's a good message for America and Americans.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have a message for bin Laden?
I don't think you could air that. I guess the message would be, you will face God's justice. The only question is whether or not you'll face the justice of the United States prior to facing God's. That's what's going to happen. And we're a patient nation. Whether it takes 10 months, 10 years, it's going to occur. And that's really the cultural war that we find ourselves in between what he believes to be God and what we know to be God.
What are your plans for September 11, 2002?
Well, the Army's got plans for me.
Okay.
I will, but let me answer that in a personal way and then a professional way.
Sure.
From a personal perspective, it's not a day to mourn what happened to me. It's a day to mourn those that didn't get a chance to live. But for me personally, it is a day to celebrate the miracle that God did in my life. And then the Army, from the perspective of honorary type of ceremonies or things of that nature, has asked me to participate in a couple of things. There's some interviews I'll do on September 11th with various media organizations to talk about the one-year anniversary, things of that nature. But it will be a solemn day for the nation, but it will be an individual day of celebration, to still be alive and to know that God worked a great miracle in my life that day.
To God be the glory.
Yeah, absolutely.
Some through the water, some through the flood, some through the fire, but all through the blood. Some through